All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for tuning in today. This channel is for educational purposes. We try to turn you on to great theories and discoveries and concepts that maybe you're not familiar with, things that are off the beaten path, things that are a little bit difficult because they've been suppressed. These are things that the powers that be um, haven't told you about, have hidden away in the corners, and um, they're also somewhat difficult in terms of you have to you have to dig a little bit. You have to dig in a little bit mentally. Sometimes the concepts are um, a little bit difficult, and emotionally they can be difficult as well because they upset some of your cherished beliefs. And so um, this uh, is a channel for people who are pretty motivated to, um, to dig in and to get at some truths. These are, you know, things that you don't have to believe me. You just have to, you know, go over the material and um, ask yourself what you think. And this is another in our Bible Decode series, number 411. And we've looked at a lot of the uh, different evidence for the Roman origins hypothesis for the New Testament. And that is that just like everything else in your life, it just turns out that the New Testament of the Bible was a psychological operation. It was just an op. It was actually written by the Roman Caesars of the late first century. These were called the Flavians. The Flavian dynasty from 69 to 96 AD wrote the New Testament as a fictional story in order to tame or domesticate and to humiliate the Jews, who they couldn't stand because um, of their rebellious spirit. The Romans had pulled into Judea as occupying power there in about 63 BC, and for over a century, it was nothing but conflict with the Jews. Um, Revolts, revolutions, insurrections, terrorist attacks, um, uprisings, and otherwise just high maintenance for the Romans. And given the Romans' huge empire and the many different nations and tribes that were under their empire, the Romans couldn't really afford, this kind of high maintenance um, for just one group of people. The Jews were by far the most difficult to govern of all the nations under their umbrella. And so, and then this culminated in this war that broke out in 66 AD, when a couple of self-proclaimed Jewish messiahs, following the biblical prophecies or the prophecies that are in the Old Testament books, um, they led a revolt in Jerusalem and expelled the Roman leader there, sent him back to Rome, where he, um, informed Emperor Nero of the situation, and Emperor Nero sent in the Roman legions, um, a few of them anyway, under General Vespasian. And it took Vespasian and his son Titus 7 years to put down the revolt. So this is why the Romans had made an investment into putting together a psychological operation in order to tame or domesticate the Jews, because they did not want another uprising, another 7-year war break out anytime soon. And they knew that the Jews were utterly resilient. You could completely decimate them, just like the Romans did in this war. Ultimately, they destroyed Jerusalem and killed hundreds of thousands of Jews. But they knew the Jews were coming back. And so they wrote a story that was about a Jewish Messiah who was not a military commander, but instead was a prince of peace and believed in turning the other cheek to oppression and walking the extra mile, carrying the Roman soldiers' heavy backpack, and uh, rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, believing that the Roman slave owning soldier was the possessor of the greatest faith in all of Israel. And then at the same time, this same Jewish Messiah was highly critical of the Jews and the Jewish traditions when he overturned the tables of the Jewish money changers at the temple, and when he yelled and screamed at the Jewish merchants who were selling small animals at the temple, when he warned his potential followers that they needed to abandon their families to follow him. These are Jews that he is, um, admonishing. And then moving forward in the New Testament, we have Paul, who is even more deferential than Jesus toward the Romans, and even more critical than Jesus of the Jews, almost as if it were written by the Romans, which it was, which you can find out directly if you get yourself a copy of Josephus and his 7-volume work, War of the Jews. We know that Josephus was an agent of the Romans. He was known as Flavius Josephus, and he wrote his books from Caesar's palace in Rome, to the great fanfare uh, of the Caesars, and especially Titus Caesar. And um, when you examine Josephus's work, uh, you can see just how many parallels there are between Josephus and the Gospels. Michael Menescot's found 250 parallels, not just, kind of one thing here and one thing there, but just what you would call thematic parallels um, between Josephus, 250 of them just in the book of Luke. That is over 10 per chapter, which means that the book of Luke is completely saturated with parallels to Josephus. And sometimes the parallels go one way, sometimes they go the other way. Sometimes there's mockery, derision, and ridicule. Sometimes there is, grim humor. Sometimes there is just, most of it is rather mocking and derisive. Uh, but you can tell that they were written by the same people at the same time for the same reason. So basically, your Gospels, especially the book of Luke, was written by Josephus, whoever Josephus was. We can kind of glean some of that from reading his autobiography, but what we really know about Josephus is that he was an agent of the Romans. And I think that he personally was probably like a think tank, um, a group of Roman intellectuals that were working for the Caesars that put their heads together and came up with this story. And now, when they did come up with the story, there is certainly a great deal there. There's a great amount of uh, righteous material, material that you could really found a religion upon, um, you know, ho- that you can live your life based on. It's important to note that the Romans wanted you to be a good citizen. They wanted you to be honest and hardworking and industrious and, humble and all these kind of Christian values, because that would make you very low maintenance for them. That's what they wanted. They didn't want you to be revolting after every slight, or after every little difficulty that came along. They didn't want you to be involved in anything that was going to upset the Romans Empire. So they were fine with you being, pious and righteous. Um, so it's what you would call a limited hangout. The Romans inserted a lot of stuff from other religions and other mythologies, other philosophies, ancient Egyptian, ancient Greek and Roman, especially Stoic philosophy, but a lot of even ancient uh, Greek and Roman mythology, ancient uh, Indian and Chinese and Japanese religion and mythology, ancient Persian, Mithraism, Zoroastrianism, uh, pagan mystery schools, alchemy, astrology, shamanism, numerology, magic, uh, in addition to maybe some more far-flung um, uh, belief systems such as Sumerian, um, Pygmy, and even Mexican influences. According to this author that we are looking at right now, his name is Kersey Graves, and he wrote a book that is called 16 Crucified Saviors Before Christianity, where he looks at a lot of the sources that the Romans used. Now, he did not know that the Romans used them. He doesn't suspect that the Romans were involved in a conspiracy here, but he does document all of the um, diverse influences of that the story of Jesus borrowed from much older sources. Now, we are kind of bogged down here in chapter 32 of this book, which is the 346 points of similarity between Christ and Krishna, the ancient Indian Messiah slash Savior, um, from about 1200 BC, and how that the story of Jesus borrows heavily from the story of Krishna, um, coming right down to the name Christ as opposed to Krishna. But we are hopefully going to get to uh, get a little further along in this chapter. He's getting bogged down, I think, a lot because he believes that Jesus and the story of Christianity comes from kind of the crucible of Alexandria, Egypt, where there were so many different threads of different religions in the air, and there was a great deal of syncretism combining religions, and um, there was a allegedly an Essene community there. The Essenes were a group of very pious and ascetic Jews who many suggest that the Christians came from the Essene, or that Jesus was an Essene growing up. Now, I happen to believe uh, that the Essenes never existed. They were just like the Christians. They were made up by the Romans. The only people that have ever attested to the existence of the Essenes that had seen them face to face were Roman writers, such as Josephus, his Pliny the Younger, and Philo Judaeus. These are the only three people that have ever had any eyewitness uh, encounters with the Essenes. So I don't believe that there's the story of the Essenes is true. He uses a lot of secondary sources to bolster his evidence for the existence of the Essenes. Most people in history believe that the Essenes existed, just like they believe that Josephus existed, and just like they believe that Jesus existed. But when you understand the Roman origins hypothesis, you see how the Romans falsified their entire history, and that our entire history and understanding of the ancient world is going to have to be utterly revamped uh, in um, in response to the Roman origins hypothesis, which has been suppressed. There are, I'd say, a dozen authors that are out there who have written on the Roman origins hypothesis, but it has not really come to the attention of um, kind of a large enough body to cause any type of paradigm shift or any type of um, critical mass movement yet. It's inevitable and it's coming. So get yourself in on the ground floor. But we're going to start here um, with point number 21 here that I don't even know what these points are anymore. It's just been going on. But we will trudge on. It is impossible with the historic darkness which at present environs and beclouds our pathway to determine at what period or in what manner Christ became an Essene, whether he was born of Essenian parents or became a convert to the faith, because the whole period of his life, with the exception of about 3 years, is a total blank in history. There is but one incident related of his movements by his Bible biographers prior to his 27th year, leaving more than a quarter of a century of his probably active life unreported, a period that may have witnessed several important changes in his religion. We have not even his ancestry reported in his scriptural biography in either parental line, unless we assume Joseph to have been his father. The parental lineage of his mother is entirely omitted. Had we his line of ancestry, or could we trace him back to his national or family origin, we doubt not, but we should there find a full clue to the origin of his religion. We should find his ancestors were Essenian Jews, except for the fact that the Essenes never existed. Now, just to point out, this book was written back in 1876, so some of the language might be a little bit outdated. Okay, point 22, and just the general format is as well. Um, Nor can we fix the date when Essenian Buddhism among the Jews received the name of Christianity for a similar reason. There is a link, a chain of events of 400 years left out of the Bible between Judaism and Christianity. Right, the Old Testament kind of ends at about 400 BC, 300 something BC, and Christianity doesn't take over there until the first century. So there is a huge chasm there. Um, and there, that again is where Josephus comes in, because Josephus wrote a 20-volume book that is called Jewish Antiquities, and he fills in that information for us. Unfortunately, now that we know that Josephus is a propagandist and a conspirator, we can't trust that. It is also covered in some of the apocryphal works, like the book of Maccabee, the four books of Maccabees, um, but they are also frauds written by the Romans. The Romans wrote all of the Apocrypha and many of the, the Gnostic Gospels, and they wrote many of the books of the New Testament, of the Old Testament as well, including the book of Job, the second half of the book of Isaiah, um, and um, uh, and interpolated and inserted many of the other, uh, infected many of the other books of the Old Testament as well. So we're going to have to totally revamp, and they left their signatures behind. So it's not like once, once you decode something, then it's real hard to argue against it, because you kind of, you see the code and you see the signatures and you see the personality, you see the tenor of the psychological operation. It's just like decoding the 17th letter these days. At a certain point, you know, what point do you have to get to before it is statistically impossible that this is a coincidence? All of these different correspondences and all of these different, um, parallels. So anyway, a chain of events of 400 years left out of the Bible between Judaism and Christianity, thus lacking 400 years of connecting the two religions together, or of showing how the latter grew out of the former. Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament, antedates the first events of Christian history 4 centuries, or 12 generations, thus leaving a wide and dark gap between them. And besides, we cannot find the name of Christ or Christianity mentioned in any of the contemporary histories of that era till 104 years after the time fixed for Christ's birth by Christendom. Tacitus being the first writer who names either, and this was at that date. And it's important to note that Tacitus was a Roman royal, and so he doesn't count. Neither does Josephus or Suetonius or Trajan or Pliny the Younger. These are the only other people that have ever commented on the existence of Jesus that are independent of the Bible. But these are all Roman conspirators. That's why they, throw in an offhanded comment about the existence of Christianity, was to historicize it, to make it seem like this actually occurred. But we don't see this in any other writings. Only these insiders to the Roman Caesars. Now, granted, these may be the only people who are writing at all at this time, but I think that there were some Jewish commentators, and some commentators from other parts of the world who would have otherwise written up about Jesus had he existed, but nobody did. And that I would challenge any Christian out there to give me any evidence of the existence of Jesus that is outside of the Bible and outside of these Romans that are, uh, you know, either Caesars or um, agents of Caesar. and you won't be able to. So basically, you're going completely on faith and you're going zero on evidence, which is fine if that's what you want to do, but don't call yourself a truther. Okay, number 23. These facts disclose the whole secret with respect to the mystery and darkness thrown around the origin of the Christian religion, the how, the when, and the where of its origin. That chapter of Christian history is left out of the record. The Bible account itself is but fragmentary, as it leaves 9/10 of Christ's history a blank, 27 years out of the 30, and omits all mention of his ancestors beyond his grandmother, and leaves even the time of his birth a blank. Researches of the learned, says Mr. Mosheim, a standard Christian author, uh, though long and ably conducted, have been unable to fix the time of Christ's birth with certainty. Wonderful admission, truly, as it is an evidence that nothing else can be fixed with certainty with respect to the history of the man Christ Jesus, only that his doctrines and precepts were all borrowed, perhaps during the 27 dark and mysterious years of his life, if not unseen by birth. Number 24, there is no escaping the conclusion that Christianity is a borrowed system, an outgrowth and remodeling of Buddhism, with a change of name only. 1,000 facts of history prove and proclaim it, and the verdict of posterity will be unanimous in affirming it. I must say that I'm not like uh, an intrepid student of Buddhism, but I have presented 100 or so videos on Buddhism on this channel. The first 102, I believe, videos on the Reciprocal Church playlist. And if Christianity is a copy of Buddhism, it is a it is a weak copy because there is a lot to Buddhism that is not in the New Testament of the Bible. I think that Buddhism goes so much deeper than Christianity does that if it is a remodeling of Buddhism, it is a bad remodeling. I would say the same thing about the Old Testament in terms of the Old Testament is a remodeling of the ancient Sumerian stories. And it is a really weak remodeling of those more ancient stories. And if you look at the Sumerian texts, you will find, the same stories: Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah and the flood, Abraham, Sodom and Gomorrah, and all that. But the stories have much more detail and much more nuance, much more uh, uh, interpretation. There's just much more uh, there for you to understand the story, especially like the story of Adam and Eve. When you read the Sumerian, you get a completely different interpretation than you get new from reading the Old Testament Genesis version. So it doesn't surprise me that the Romans would have done this. You know, made Christianity a remodeling of Buddhism, but with kind of poison pills placed in there, and a lot of the most important aspects of Buddhism left out, so that you really uh, they really kind of created like a dead end religion, which dead ended into the Roman Catholic Church, the Dark Ages, and the feudal system for 1,000 years. And then, coming out of that with the Crusades and the Inquisition. So it's not pretty. It's not a pretty story. And this is a psyop that is still going on. So that's why I talk about it so much, because we got to put it to an end, just like we're putting all the other psyops to an end. But we don't seem to be going deep enough into our digging. We're still stuck in the 20th and 21st centuries. We need to go back to ancient history, because everything going all the way back is a psychological operation. This is, not a new thing. The Romans were masters of this. And, they put in a lot of magic, dark magic and stuff in their New Testament. I mean, it is the Romans were like some of the worst people that have ever existed. You know, they were all of them, all of these royals, these people that wrote the New Testament, they were like gay pedophiles. They carried around with them sodomite slaves, little boys that they could, get to bend over anytime they wanted to, just to get their jollies off. These are the people that wrote your New Testament. So, that hopefully may be enough to get you motivated to actually get yourself a copy of Josephus and to look at it and to recognize that what I'm telling you is the truth. Because I don't want you to believe me. I want you to do the research for yourself. You just believe me enough to go get the book yourself and look at it. Okay, number 25. From the almost endless chain of analogies exhibiting a striking resemblance, even in their minute details, of Christianity and Buddhism, we are compelled to conclude that one furnished the materials for the other, that one is the offspring, the legitimate child of the other, and as it is a settled historical fact that Buddhism is much older, there is hence no difficulty in determining which is the parent and which is the child. Number 26. Now, they are kind of using Hinduism and Buddhism interchangeably. Um, Buddhism came out of Hinduism in 600 BC, thereabouts. That's the way I understand it. But so Krishna was the 1200 BC character, and Buddha was the 600 BC character that was a Hindu originally, and then founded his own thing in the same way that Jesus was a Jew, and he founded a new thing. Okay, number 26. In the Hindu story of the creation of the human race, we find Adumo and Heva given as the names of the first man and woman answering to our Adam and Eve. Adumo and Heva. And our Shem, Ham, and Japheth are traceable to their Shema, Hama, and Japheth. I did not know that. I still don't, but I at least have been given that piece of information, so I can do some more research on it. The difference in the mode of spelling is probably owing to the difference in the languages. And under the new era, we have Christ Jesus answering to their Krishna Zeus, or Zeus, as some writers give the name of the eighth avatar. And for Maya, a godmother, we have Mary. And other similar analogies might be pointed out besides the long string of strikingly similar events previously presented in the history of the two saviors, amounting to hundreds, 346 to be exact. Number 27, such an almost countless list of similar and nearly identical incidents bids defiance and absolutely sets at naught all attempts to account for it as a mere fortuitous accident. There is no other explanation possible but that Christianity is a revamp or re-establishment of Buddhism. Interesting, again, he uses that phrase, there is no other explanation possible. Well, there actually is another explanation possible, and that is that the Romans were involved in a conspiracy, and they put all of the Buddhist elements, Hindu elements, into Christianity. That it isn't a revamp or reestablishment, it is a psychological operation. Number 28. Here, let it be noted that Christianity was not the only religion which was rehabilitated in the Alexandrian schools. On the contrary, all the popular Oriental systems then in active being had long previously passed through the same representative theological schools and creed-making institutions of that royal and commercial city. All were remodeled in its theological workshops, a fact which accounts most conclusively for the same train of religious ideas and historical incidents being found in the latter sacred books of each. And besides, Sir William Jones says, the disciples of these various systems of religion had intercourse with each other long before the time of Christ, which would necessarily bring about a uniformity in the doctrines and general character of each system. Number 29, the disciples of all the religious systems cited their initiatory miracles as a proof of being on familiar terms with God Almighty. They all healed the sick, all restored the deaf, the dumb, and the blind, all cast out devils, and all raised the dead. In fact, all their miracles and legendary marvels run in parallel lines, because all were recast in the same creed mold in Alexandria. A coincidence is thus beautifully explained, which would otherwise be hard to account for. Mr. Gibbon says, number 30, Mr. Gibbon says it was in the school of Alexandria that the Christian theology appears to have assumed a regular and scientific form. That is, the regular and scientific form of Buddhism and Essenism. Okay, I was hoping we were going to get to the end of this chapter today, but that's not going to happen. So, I don't know. I'm guessing that this chapter ends somewhere, but he just goes on and on and on the same topic, which is fine. But you kind of like to have a sense of making progress, when you're reading a book, and we've been in chapter 32 forever. I think we've got about, it looks like, maybe 2 more days here on chapter 32, but we will get there. So for today, we're going to call it quits. And like, share, subscribe, comment, and contribute. And we will be back tomorrow to continue this chapter and learn more about Christ and Krishna and the similarities between the two, and probably some other things as well. Dig in a little bit further with the Roman origins hypothesis. Like, share, subscribe, comment, and contribute. Come back tomorrow and have a wonderful